My guest today is Aneesh Gokhale, who is a historian and author of books such as Brahmaputra, the story of Lachit Barphukan, Sahyadris to Hindukush, the Maratha conquest of Lahore and Attock, and Battles of the Maratha Empire, which was released a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, very recently. And
Right,
incidentally, the book about Lachit Barphukan, Brahmaputra, the story of Lachit Barphukan, is being relaunched this year, right?
right. It's set in May, I guess. Yes.
Right, right. So, Anish, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you. It's great to
Thank
finally
you.
speak
Thanks,
face
sir.
to face with you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, sir.
Right, right, right. So can you tell me how did you get into history? So you're a historian, but I think your primary profession is the merchant navy, right? So how did
Right,
you get interested in history, and how long have you been researching history?
right. So, as I mentioned, professionally, I'm in Merchant Navy. I work as a navigation
Hmm.
officer in the Merchant Navy. And history has been a passion and hobby for me right since my school days. So, I used to read a lot. And then, after or just around that time, I started hiking and trekking a lot in the Sahyadris. So that really moved my interest towards Maratha history because then I did about 40, 50 treks, and the interest was as to who built these forts and the importance of Chhatrapati Shivaji for not just Maharashtra but for the whole of India, and how all these forts played a part in that history. And once I was on that route, then one thing led to the other, and I read up a lot of Maratha history, and finally that's how I came up with my first book, that is Sahyadris to Hindukush, which was published in 2012, about 10 years now. Once I had written Sahyadris to Hindukush, then I decided to move towards a different topic. Again, Lachit Barphukan, uh, which is something totally unknown, and that's how I wrote Brahmaputra, which is, as you mentioned, going to be relaunched by Bloomsbury in a few months from now. And over a period of a few years, that is right from 2012, even before that, to up to 2019, I had contributed quite a few articles on Maratha history to quite a few publications. So the third book, that is Battles of the Maratha Empire, is actually born out of these articles. So some of those articles are there in the book. Obviously, they have been expanded and a lot of maps have been added and these kind of things. And that's how the third book has come about.
I see. Right. So how did you get into the history of Assam all the way from the Marathas? How did that switch happen?
So, Surya Rishi Khan actually had chanced upon Amar Chitra Katha when I was in 7th or 8th standard. Just happened to read it. Uh, it's about how Lachit Barphukan fought against the Mughals in Assam, and he used guerrilla tactics and medieval warfare. So that story has somehow stuck with me, even after 10, 15 years. I mean, I read that book when I was in 7th standard, and I wrote about him in Brahmaputra when I was 26 or 27 years old. So that persona I had found really inspiring. Plus, at the same time, we don't know much about the history of the Northeast. Uh, so, Lachit Barphukan is somebody who had fought against Aurangzeb. Some names are very familiar to us as part of medieval Indian history. Aurangzeb, Chhatrapati Shivaji, Ram Singh, Diler Khan. So these names again appear in a different context when you're talking about Assam. And the whole spirit of fighting against Mughals or keeping their land free or fighting for their Desh and Dharma is something that is a common thread uh, to various histories in India, the Assam history or the Rajputs or the Marathas. So then I decided let's explore this topic in more detail because obviously the Amar Chitra Katha was about 25, 30 pages long, that's all. And that's how I went exploring. I went to Assam, I stayed there, uh, interacted with people, went to a lot of places associated with the life of Lachit Borphukan, and that's how I managed to write the book Brahmaputra.
Right, right. So today we're going to discuss the Marathas actually, because that is one topic that I am not as well versed in as I would like to be, and you are definitely the expert in that. So let's talk about the Marathas. So could you tell me what is the origin of the Maratha people? I mean, I would expect that one would start with the history of the language, right? What is the origin of the Marathi language? So it would begin as a Prakrit, I suppose, at some time.
Yes, it has a roots in Prakrit, which obviously
Hmm.
has roots in Sanskrit to start with. And the origins of the Marathas actually is a very contested claim as to where the origins lie. Uh,
Hmm.
One logic is that they actually have South Indian origins, and uh, from Maharathi comes out, and from Maharashtri actually, the word Maharashtra comes. So one logic is that from the South India, from the Chalukyas and Hoysalas, that the Marathas are tracing their lineage. There is another theory that a large percentage of the Marathas, that is your 96 clan, Shanu Kuri Maratha, that is clan, actually have Rajput ancestry, that they trace themselves from the Rajputs of North India, especially the 36 Suryavanshi clans. So these are the ones that will be tracing down into Maharashtra. And there are theories that the Parmars of Rajasthan trace themselves to Pawars of Maharashtra and such kind of things. But again, this is a very contested topic as to what exactly is the lineage when you are tracing the Marathas. Because first of all, there is a very large time span to consider. Maybe just about 2000, 3000 years of so much of movement of people. Plus, Maharashtra is right in the center of the country. So it will going to have influences both from the south and the north. And maybe the truth is somewhere in between where maybe the influence is going to be from the north as well as the south.
Right. So actually, the thing is this: that in India, everybody is like there is no such thing as a separate ethnicity of the Marathi people or the Gujarati people or anything. We are actually, if you look at our population genetically, we are essentially the same people. Whether it's North India, South India, East or West. I mean, I've had a podcast with Dr. Neeraj Rai in which he has spoken about this. So there is no such thing as Aryan, Dravidian, or any of that. All the
Exactly.
skin color differences are all these are superficial. So I would actually, yeah, you are absolutely right that there is no point going into the actual origins of the original ethnic origins of the Maratha people, but
Yes.
linguistic origins would be certainly interesting. So, how old, in your opinion, is the Marathi language? When does it first emerge in history?
The Marathi language emerges the 1500 years ago, maybe a bit
Hmm.
earlier than that. One of the oldest inscriptions is found in Karnataka and not in Maharashtra. I think it's around 1000 more than years in that. The script associated in Marathi language, that is your Modi script. Uh, the use of the current script happens much later. The Modi script appears around, I think, the 12th or 13th century AD. And it's only later on, it's only in the 19th century that the script starts moving towards the current Devanagari script that is in use.
I see. I see. So, if we look at the recorded or known history of the Maratha people, who are the initial kings? I mean, when does the presence of the Maratha people or Maharashtrian people become first known in the region?
So the presence of Maratha as such, we can go back to Pulakeshi the second, definitely. Can go back even before that to Satvahans. So the Satvahanas were ruling over the what is currently Western Maharashtra in the first century AD, and definitely they would have been the precursors of the current day Maharashtrians that are living there. So they are ruling from a place near Junnar. Even today, you can see some of the traces at a cave called Naneghat. So it's a trade route, and there are still some traces, inscriptions there. A lot of Buddhist caves are there which existed during those times. Later on, we find that when the invasions from the north happened, we have the Devgiris of, sorry, the Yadavs of Devgiri present there to take Alauddin Khilji's invasion. So obviously, somebody with a Yadav surname has already present there. That is a Maharashtrian Yadav surname from the 13th century. So when Alauddin Khilji attacks in 1296 AD, these people already been there ruling for quite a few centuries, in fact, and they are the ones who bear this first attack. Also, let's bear in mind that because of the terrain of Western Maharashtra, uh, hilly terrain and forests and ravines, it was very difficult to uh, transform the entire population from one ethnicity or one religion to another religion because they operated something similar to how the Afghan tribes operate in the northwest region. That they are safe in their strongholds and they kept to their customs and religion and whatever local customs they followed, and just the urban centers got converted or got rulers who were different. And these people basically shifted their allegiance from ruler to ruler because they were going to be safe in their personal fiefdoms. And obviously, then Chhatrapati Shivaji comes in and he then shifts. He makes a huge change in this particular way of functioning. In that, uh, he takes their fiefdoms and carves a kingdom out of them. But of course, that's a later day story. That is much later after Alauddin Khilji. In fact, about 300 years later.
Right. So before Chhatrapati Shivaji, was there any great king of the Marathas, or does the real story begin with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj?
To be frank, the real story does begin with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj because the
Mhm.
Yadavs of Devagiri, yes, they were ruling over a very large kingdom, over a very rich kingdom. And there are examples, I can't remember names right now, but there are a couple of examples where resistance was provided to invading armies by Marathi rulers. But after the demise of the Yadavs of Devagiri in 1296, 1296 the first invasion took place, and that same invasion then he carried forward right up to Madurai. And the Yadavs were made a vassal state. 20 years later, they completely destroyed and no trace removed remained of them for the next 300 years. It's only when Chhatrapati Shivaji appears on the scene that the wheel of time starts turning back in the opposite direction. And which is why his greatness is so much, because there is nothing to look forward to over a 300-year time gap in Western
I
Maharashtra
see.
before his advent.
Right. So then let's talk about the great Chhatrapati Shivaji. So what is his story? I think it begins with his father, actually, right? The story of
Right.
this great man. Yeah, please tell me.
So, as I mentioned, that the Devgiri Yadavs were the last Hindu kingdom in Western Maharashtra, Maharashtra for that matter.
Hmm.
And it is believed that Jijamata, that is Chhatrapati Shivaji's mother, was a descendant from that lineage. Obviously, they remained active in politics because their dynasty got destroyed, but some of the other part remained active in politics, and they then were politicians or they were sardars of various Muslim rulers of Maharashtra. Uh, so Jijamata is believed to be from that lineage. Shahaji Raje was a Sardar with the Adil Shahi kingdom, and it is largely believed that it was his idea of establishing Swarajya. And in fact, he made a few attempts at establishing it himself. First attempt, we believe, is that when the Mughals and Adil Shah had combined against the uh, Nizam Shahi of North Maharashtra. Uh, there was a Nizam Shahi in North Maharashtra, Adil Shah in South Maharashtra, and the Mughals were everywhere else. So the last ruler was a person named Murtaza, who was 7 years old, and Shahaji Raje rescued him and tried to actually save him. And it is believed that the whole effort of being done so that Shahaji Raje could then evolve some kind of Swarajya with this Murtaza fellow as his titular head, who was 7 or 8 years old. That didn't succeed because the Mughals finally won the battle. After this, it is surmised that his elder son Sambhaji was going to establish a Swarajya in Karnataka, and his younger son Shivaji was going to establish a Swarajya in Maharashtra. It's actually what happened. The key role that Shahaji Raje played was in keeping Adil Shah completely in the dark about what Chhatrapati Shivaji was doing in Maharashtra. It is very critical that the first few years of Shivaji Maharaj's life, where he becomes active in politics, from the time he takes his first fort, which is believed to be Torna, but there is also evidence that this could be a nearby fort called Purandar. Uh, he started off around 16, 17 years of age by taking all these strongholds in his hands. And the way he did this was not by fighting, but by taking Adil Shah's seal to those forts, because his father was obviously minister in his kingdom. And he was just take the seal there and say that I am come here for the upkeep of these forts so that they can be managed better. And that is how a lot of forts were taken over by Chhatrapati Shivaji in those initial years without actually fighting for them. And the role Shahaji Raja played was that he used to talk to Adil Shah, and that this is a 17-year-old boy going around a few forts and asking his garrison to do a proper job of it. All this is being done so that your rule becomes stronger in Maharashtra, in Pune and Nashik regions. There is nothing to get alarmed about it. By the time Adil Shah realizes what is going wrong, it is too late, and a lot of forts are in Chhatrapati Shivaji's control, and he has substantial number of soldiers with him. He has substantial number of coins, I mean wealth with him to feed people and to employ more soldiers. Shahaji Raje also sends four of his own ministers to Maharashtra, to Pune region, uh, such as, you know, there's one person called Kate and a few other names I will come up with. There are three or four ministers that sent, and their job is to look after Chhatrapati Shivaji. Uh, Not to speak of Dadoji Kondev, who is his own guru, who teaches him along with Jijamata about statecraft and weapons and all this. And Shivaji Maharaj spends a lot of time actually moving up and down the Sahyadris to know the people and the terrain before he starts moving on his Swaraj journey.
Right. So, so we have so his father was in the employ in the service of the Adil Shahid, right?
Right.
Right. So then, what move does Shivaji make that makes him a significant force in this region? Because, right, like you said, that he was very smart. He got a lot of force by showing the seal. I mean, that is one difference which I find between the Marathas and the Rajputs. The Rajputs wanted to fight with honor, be noble, and all that. The Marathas were more like, we want to win at any cost, and we will do anything it takes to defeat the enemy. So that is one very interesting thing that I see among the Marathas.
Right. So, I believe the first, there is one battle which takes place in 1650s, I believe, uh,
Mhm.
where Adil Shah sent one of his junior commanders to fight against Chhatrapati Shivaji. He gets defeated and comes back. So that is the first indication that Adil Shah is starting to believe that something going wrong in Maharashtra, in the what is the northern reach of his own kingdom. And you can safely surmise that it is the killing of Afzal Khan where Chhatrapati Shivaji really imposes his authority on the politics of the country by killing Afzal Khan.
So
Till
who
the
was
killing,
Absal Khan? Was he a general? What was he?
so Afzal Khan was general in Adil Shah's army. He was about, I think,
Okay.
should have been 15 to 20 years senior to Chhatrapati Shivaji at that point of time. Shivaji Maharaj, when he killed Afzal Khan, was around 29 or 30 years of age. And Afzal Khan had a reputation for being a ruthless warrior. He had, in fact, won a lot of battles in South India. He was supposed to be of immense physical strength. Uh, it is basically be written he was more than 6.5 feet tall and all this. One interesting incident regarding Afzal Khan is how he defeated Aurangzeb. There was a time when Mughals had attacked Adil Shah,
Mhm.
and Aurangzeb had been caught by the same Afzal Khan, and he had been produced before Adil Shah. Now, to do with this fellow, and Adil Shah had let Aurangzeb go alive because he was worried that if something happens to Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan is going to come down with his entire army to save his son. Very obvious thing to do. So that was one incident. But there are two incidences which are more important for us from Maratha history point of view. One is the conduct of Afzal Khan at a place called Sira. So Sira is a place in Karnataka, and the ruler there was Kasturi Ranga Nayak. So Afzal Khan went, they fought a battle, he won that battle, and after that a message was sent that Kasturi Ranga Nayak is to come down from the fort to Afzal Khan's tent for signing whatever treaties are to be signed, give up land, this, that, etc. So Kasturi Ranga Nayak came unarmed, as is obvious for this kind of meeting, and Afzal Khan killed him once he had reached his tent. So this was an incident which happened about 19 years prior to Chhatrapati Shivaji, where Afzal Khan actually killed somebody who was unarmed and in his own tent had come for a treaty signing. Second incident was at another Karnataka fort called Kanakgiri, where Chhatrapati Shivaji's elder brother Sambhaji was fighting for obviously Adil Shah, and Afzal Khan and Sambhaji were in the same army attacking this fort at Kanakgiri. But it is generally surmised that Sambhaji made a charge towards the fort, and Afzal Khan did not provide him support from behind. Uh, Basically, caused him to die in the siege. So obviously, this was some. Both of the incidences you couldn't really pin the blame on Afzal Khan in any way, but it was a kind of thing where somebody was accidented or Kasturanga just happened to be killed by Afzal Khan. So this was the history that preceded Afzal Khan before he came uh, all the way to Pratapgarh to meet Chhatrapati Shivaji. Now, before the killing of Afzal Khan, Shivaji Maharaj was seen by both Adil Shah and Mughals as at worst nuisance and at best somebody that they could use against each other. So Adil Shah believed that get some work done by Shivaji Maharaj against the Mughals and then I can wash my hands of it, but it is not being done by me. This all they used that they were not looking at him as somebody who was actually going to be a political threat for them anyway. Because he was not controlling land, first of all, he was controlling just the region around what is today's Pune, Satara, and a little bit of what is today around Mumbai. So it is hardly Pune, Satara is maybe 150 kilometers. So we're not looking at a very large piece of land. Uh, Compared to that, Adil Shah's kingdom stretched all the way from Kolhapur, in fact, slightly north of Kolhapur, right into Karnataka, and the Mughals were obviously dominating the whole of North India. So it was basically believed that Afzal Khan will go, he'll make a quick job of Chhatrapati Shivaji, and that will be the end of whatever he's going to put up. As it turned out, Chhatrapati Shivaji won this battle. And not only did he win, but he then started the invasion of Adil Shah's territory. This very important thing that happens in Chhatrapati Shivaji's life is that he imposes costs on his adversaries. He doesn't stop at merely winning the contest. Afzal Khan attacked, Afzal Khan was killed, his army was defeated at Pratapgarh, and that would have been the end of the story as far as history is concerned. And it would have made Chhatrapati Shivaji great in his own right, even doing that much. But by imposing a cost on Adil Shah, by invading his territory, he moved from Satara, Pratapgarh is in Satara, he moved from Satara and he moved crossed what are two modern day districts of Sangli and Kolhapur, and he reached right up to the walls of Bijapur. And in fact, the aftermath of Afzal Khan's death, Shivaji Maharaj's territory doubled. That was the effect it had. And this was the incident that really shook up everybody because he was now no longer a pushover or a person who could be deployed against another power. Uh, Sorry, Adil Shah had sent his best general to contest him. He had got defeated. Not only that, his entire army had got routed at Pratapgarh, and Shivaji Maharaj had showed an acumen and strategic skill that went across various facets. It was not just about killing Afzal Khan, but it was about strategizing um, right from the selection of the fort. Why are we going to meet him at Pratapgarh? Who is going to move from the coastline towards Pratapgarh? Who is going to defend Pratapgarh? Who is going to be his bodyguard? Who is going to be facing Adil Shah's strongest troops? So this was a person called Kanoji Jedhe, uh, who was one of the persons sent by Shahaji Raje earlier to protect Shivaji Maharaj. And Kanoji Jedhe was a very powerful Sardar. When Chhatrapati Shivaji decided to fight against Afzal Khan, if he had decided to back out, it would have been quite possible that all the other supporters of Shivaji Maharaj would have said, "We are not going to take a part in this contest." So this is the kind of inspiration that Shivaji Maharaj bringing of, by promising Swaraj that even seasoned generals like Kanoji Jede, who had actually seen Afzal Khan at work and seen how powerful he is, believe that it is time to give an idea called Hindavi Swaraj a chance, rather than be pessimistic about it. And he played a very crucial role in his victory. Plus, the Afzal Khan campaign also saw Chhatrapati Shivaji's own queen dying in the intervening months. About 4 or 5 months the campaign went on. His own queen died, but he managed to take even that in his stride because the planning had to be at such a level that he could not simply back out of it at the last moment. Plus, when all this thing was going on, Aurangzeb sent a khillat or a robe of honor from Delhi for Chhatrapati Shivaji. That it is for Chhatrapati Shivaji to join the Mughals against Adil Shah. So what this robe of honor did was that it created a timer for the entire campaign to take place. Because with the robe of honor, the Mughals had arrived before Afzal Khan and Shivaji issue were settled. It was going to be a completely different ball game. So Shivaji Maharaj knew that the whole issue had to be settled within 3 or 4 months. He managed to move his troops and within that time managed to expand his own kingdom. And in the medieval context, 3 or 4 months is not really a very long period of time. So it's uh, if there is one battle that is to be pointed out for showing Chhatrapati Shivaji's greatness, it is definitely a battle of Pratapgarh.
I see. So the initial conflict was with the Adil Shahi kingdom, right?
Right.
And right. So then, what was the so Aurangzeb sends this robe of honor, which means it establishes diplomatic relations of some kind between
Right.
Chhatrapati Shivaji and the Mughals. So then, how does that relationship proceed forward?
So the thing is that the Mughals are too powerful for both the
Hmm.
Marathas and for Adil Shah. Neither of them wants to deal with them on a one-to-one basis. Now Aurangzeb is a very cunning politician. He sends a robe of honor for Chhatrapati Shivaji. And what this means is that he's going to combine with Chhatrapati Shivaji and attack the Adil Shahi kingdoms. Till that point of time, like I mentioned before, Abdul Khan is killed. The Mughals think that the Adil Shah is their worst adversary. And Aurangzeb made it amply clear that he wants to expand the Mughal kingdom, a Mughal empire, all the way to South India and get rid of all these kingdoms that are there, Adil Shahi, Qutub Shahi, whoever is there. And the Marathas are not seeing much of a threat in 1659. So he sends this killer to Shaiste Khan. And what happens is that now the Marathas and Adil Shah both are contrary as to what is going to happen next. One is that the Khillat actually reaches Chhatrapati Shivaji, and now he has to take up the difficult decision of joining the Mughals. Uh, because then obviously that would mean losing a lot of his own independence once he decides to go and ally with somebody like Aurangzeb. Obviously, what this means is that once he has joined the Mughals, his force to defeat Adil Shah becomes almost invincible. Secondly, that Khillat may have come for Chhatrapati Shivaji, but at the last moment, Shaista Khan decides to go and join Adil Shah. And because religion obviously going to play a part at some place somewhere. And if Adil Shah and the Mughals join hands together with Afzal Khan leading those armies, and Chhatrapati Shivaji is going to be a big spot of bother as it is, because now two armies have combined against him. Which is why it's very important that the campaign is won. He wins it and manages to push back the Afzal Khan's armies right into Bijapur. Then he expands his kingdom and reaches Kolhapur and a fort called Panha. Then he gets surrounded by the Adil Shahi armies at Panha, and after that we have this entire episode of his escape from Panha in the dead of the night, and then Baji Prabhu Deshpande gets killed trying to defend what is believed to be the pass between Panha and a fort called Vishalgarh, but now newer evidence suggests that this fight took place closer to the other fort called Vishalgarh. While all this is happening, the Mughals, that is Shaista Khan, arrives in Pune and he makes himself comfortable in the Lal Mahal, that is Chhatrapati Shivaji's childhood home. Shaista Khan and Daud Khan then ravage the entire countryside around Pune. While Chhatrapati Shivaji is engaged elsewhere, the entire countryside is ravaged to the tune of some you know, few lakhs or crores of rupees. After this is actually the first. There is a smaller conflict with the Mughals in the Konkan, but this is the real challenge that has come in the form of Shaista Khan for Shivaji, where he actually manages to reach his own childhood home and his almost his own capital uh, in Pune. Then, of course, we have this whole episode about Shaista Khan's fingers getting cut by Chhatrapati Shivaji and he trying to escape. Again, here we see that Chhatrapati Shivaji doesn't merely stop at evicting Shaista Khan, but he mounts an attack on Surat. Surat is the financial capital of the Mughals. And Chhatrapati Shivaji goes to Surat. Outside its gates, he stops his army and he says that this is the amount of money that I looted from Pune by Shaista Khan. This is the amount of money I want from this place. If this payment is made, I'll take my army and go back. The Mughals refuse to do that. The Maratha army attacks Surat, and that is how we have the first raid of Surat. And this ends with uh, much more money than what was being demanded by Chhatrapati Shivaji, ending up in the Maratha coffers. This is then followed by the invasion of Diler Khan and Mirza Raji Jai Singh. So we see that a series of events brings the Mughals and Marathas into bigger and bigger conflict, which is Diler Khan and Mirza Raja Jai Singh episode is then obviously, you know, succeeded by the escape, visit to Agra, then the escape from Agra, and then various other incidences.
Could you talk about that, the visit to Agra of Shivaji Maharaj and the escape from that? What exactly? Why did he go to Agra? He was already in conflict with the Mughals, so why did he go there?
So Diler Khan and Mirza Raja Jai Singh have attacked uh, him
Hmm.
in the aftermath of this Surat raid, and
Hmm.
together the armies are huge, and in fact they are the best commanders. These two, the Diler Khan and Mirza Raja Jai Singh, are the best two commanders that Aurangzeb can field, and they are the ones together posted against Chhatrapati Shivaji. So Diler Khan is his go-to man for just about any kind of conflict resolution. Diler Khan is sent against Chhatrapati Shivaji. Diler Khan has been sent against Assam. Diler Khan has been sent against the Pashtun tribals in the northwest. So wherever Aurangzeb finds a problem that requires a military solution, Diler Khan is sent. And this also shows Chhatrapati Shivaji's greatness, that this is the person that he has to face. In a few years, 3 or 4 years after facing Afzal Khan, the size of the armies are too big for Chhatrapati Shivaji to handle or his force to handle, and finally decides, especially after losing the fort of Purandar, that if he is going to lose one person, one important person, Sardar, at every junction, by the time he finishes fighting, he will have nobody left. So he makes what is called a tactical retreat. He says, "Okay, fine, I give you 23 forts," and he agrees to sign a a peace treaty with him. And Mirza Raja Singh says that all this has to be done in Delhi, or sorry, Agra. So we have to obviously visit Agra for this, which is why Chhatrapati Shivaji makes this entire journey to Agra to visit Aurangzeb, that is the Mughal emperor. Now there are various promises made by Mirza Raja Jai Singh in his communication with Chhatrapati Shivaji as to what is going to transpire at Agra. One of the things that he agrees to is that Chhatrapati Shivaji will be given a status commensurate to what his achievements are. Right? There's also talk of him being made the viceroy of the Deccan and more or less given a quasi-independent charge of what is happening in the Deccan. So obviously, Chhatrapati Shivaji goes there with the promises that he believes are going to be kept, and he goes there because, again, Mirza Raja Singh's word is supposed to be the absolute gospel. Once he has promised this is going to be carried through, it is obviously incumbent on on Mirza Jasin that these promises are kept, or at least Chhatrapati Shivaji is kept safe. As it so happens that Chhatrapati Shivaji reaches Agra and he is treated like any common Mansabdar. In fact, Chhatrapati Sambhaji is only 8 years old. He is given a Mansabdari of 5,000. Chhatrapati Shivaji is given a Mansabdari of the same 5,000. So the kind of promises that have been made, that kind of expectation that Chhatrapati Shivaji has, were not really fulfilled when he goes to Agra. And Aurangzeb actually could have simply killed Chhatrapati Shivaji at that point of time, but that is not a very easy thing to do because Chhatrapati Shivaji has come there with the word of Mirza Raja Jai Singh. And Aurangzeb doesn't want to do anything that will put him at a crossroad with Mirza Raji by openly killing Chhatrapati Shivaji. So Aurangzeb devises nice means of trying to get rid of Chhatrapati Shivaji. One of them is by sending Chhatrapati Shivaji to Kabul. They actually a complete plan made that Chhatrapati Shivaji has to go to Kabul with one of his Muslim commanders. And once he has gone there beyond Peshawar and Jamrud and all these places, somewhere in the mountains, some arrow can hit him and he can get killed. After this, there's not much exploration to be done. He can be very easily, a death can be brushed off in that kind of case. Then Aurangzeb is also trying to build a Pakka house for Chhatrapati Shivaji because he's then kept in a temporary tent because there's not adequate accommodation for him in Agra. So he's building a proper house under Raj Sandaz Khan, who is then going to keep Shivaji with him. So this is the kind of thing. It is quite possible that Aurangzeb wanted to kill Chhatrapati Shivaji at that point of time, but kill him in such a way that the blame doesn't come on him. Because if the blame comes on Aurangzeb, then his Rajputs get angry at this whole conduct. That kind of thing he doesn't want to get into. So the all indications are there that Aurangzeb wanted to get rid of Chhatrapati Shivaji, but not get his hands stained in the process. As it so happened, Chhatrapati Shivaji escaped from the whole fracas, and that was something that Aurangzeb couldn't bear. In fact, Kavi Bhushan has written as to how it became uh, news all over the what is today's Uttar Pradesh and the entire region around Agra that Chhatrapati Shivaji came and escaped from Aurangzeb's own prison.
Right, right, right. So Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj escapes from Agra. Then where does he go? He goes all the way back to Maharashtra again.
So he goes back, he takes a circumambitious route actually. Aurangzeb
Hmm.
believes that he's going to head straight south toward Maharashtra, but what does is he first heads north towards Mathura. Then he turns around and he goes eastwards. Then he goes right up to Jagannath Puri. And then he again travels westwards and then reaches Maharashtra. So he's actually moved in a triangular formation, quite away from what his normal route would have been. So that is actually how he has kept the Mughal soldiers off his track by moving in a direction that is totally opposite to everything else. He goes back to Rajgarh, that is his capital, and so this is 1667, the end of 1667. He spent 1668, 1669 rebuilding his army. Now in 1669, the end of 1669 and early 1670, two very important incidences happen. One is that there is a farman for destroying Hindu temples. Aurangzeb's famous farman for
Yes, yes.
destroying Hindu temples. And so that he wants to show that he actually not just put a farman out, he's actually acting on it. He destroys one Kashi Vishwanath and he destroys second Krishna Janmabhoomi. So these two temples are destroyed in 1669, 1670. It is surmised that one of the reasons that Chhatrapati Shivaji again opened this campaign against the Mughals is the destruction of these temples. There were various other factors which also had to play a part. One was that he signed a truce with the Mughal prince who was there in Aurangabad at that point of time. But we'll see that the destruction of these temples and the start of the anti-Mughal campaign are very close to each other. Plus, it is not just Chhatrapati Shivaji, but also other people like Gokura Jat in North India and Chhatrasal Bundela, who is also reacting to the same events in their own way. That is the destruction of these two temples and other temples along with them. So we find that January 1670, Krishna Janmabhoomi temple gets pulled down. That is known at the time as Devra of Kesharai. And February 1670, we find Tanaji Manasare climbing Sinhagad and getting hold of it from the Mughals. So the chain of events is that Chhatrapati Shivaji come back from Agra, then the Farmans get passed, and from 1670 this campaign begins against the Mughals, which goes on for 2 years, right up to the victory at a place called Salher. And this is how Chhatrapati Shivaji, who has given out 23 forts in 1663, 1665, sorry, he manages to regain all these forts. And not only that, he also manages to regain forts from the Mughals, which are never his to start. So in fact, he
I see.
expands his territory, and he again comes back to the political importance that he had prior to the invasion of Diler Khan and Mirza Raji Jai Singh, which is why once his victories in 1672 are completed, 2 years later he crowns himself as the Chhatrapati of the Marathas, of the whole kingdom.
I see. So in 1672 he becomes the Chhatrapati, right?
1672, he finishes this campaign against the Mughals.
Okay. In
Starts in
74.
1674, June, he finally crowns himself the Chhatrapati. Obviously, there's a whole process involved which goes into it, which must have taken quite some time, maybe 6 8 months. Uh,
Okay.
but the political importance, he had to prove himself politically strong in the entire Swat from Nashik right up to Kolhapur, which he does through this campaign against the Mughals. And then he crowns himself as an independent ruler, which is in itself a very important event.
Right. So after he becomes the Chhatrapati, what happens? The conflict continues with the Maratha with the Mughals.
Right. So he becomes Chhatrapati in 1674, and from
Mhm.
1674 to 1680, about 6 year time gap, In these 6 years, the most important campaign that takes place is his Dukchen Division, uh, which happened between 1675 to 1678, more or less the entire time period that he's arrived since the coronation. And it's very interesting how this campaign takes place. So, Shivaji Maharaj knows that he has a stepbrother, Ekoji, in Tamil Nadu. So, there are some lands of Shahaji Raje which are near Jinji and Pondicherry of today, which is the Tanjavur kingdom later on. And so, once he wants to take some of his own portion from those lands, Chhatrapati Shivaji, and more importantly, he knows that his own kingdom, whether it stretches from Nagpur, I'm sorry, from Nashik to Kolhapur and all these places, it's still a very limited place geographically. It can easily get surrounded from all sides and leave him with no options. So there is no, what you call in today's term, strategic depth to this
Hmm.
kingdom of Chhatrapati Shivaji. He doesn't know where to fall back in case of an invasion. Where do his armies go and retreat to regroup? So that is why he decided that there is absolute need to have some kind of fortification, some fort, some place you can escape to in South India. Which is why a campaign has to be taken so as to reach their place and take hold of those places. Now, how do you move across a territory ruled by Adil Shah in the first place? And then there is one more kingdom, Qutub Shah. So Chhatrapati Shivaji signs a treaty of friendship with Qutub Shah, which is the region around today's Hyderabad, more or less today's Andhra Pradesh and Telangana region, and he was ruling at a time from Golconda Fort. So he says that I have signed a treaty of friendship with the Qutub Shahi ruler. Obviously, to reach Qutub Shah's Hyderabad or Golconda, he has to move through Karnataka. So he then sent letter to Adil Shah that I am going to move through your territory to reach that place. That is the only way I can go there. So allow me to pass. This is my route. I am going through here. Allow me to pass through your kingdom. So then Adil Shah has to obviously allow him to pass all the way. Thirdly, he signs a truce with the Mughals. The Mughals are actually attacking Adil Shah at this point of time. And Shivaji Maharaj says that I will not trouble you. Because anyways, I have been troubling you for past 4 years. Now let us sign a truce. You keep fighting with Adil Shah. I will now move through Adil Shah's territory. I have to meet Qutub Shah. So I will be taking my army. This is what I'm going to do for next couple of years. It's very interesting that he planned this campaign in the month of June. Now, why June? Because he knows that in June there will be torrential monsoon in the Western Ghats. If anyone decides to attack, the monsoons are enough to take care of him. At the same time, the eastern coast of India doesn't have any rain at this time of the year. That rain is going to come later on in maybe December or January. So the weather is going to protect his flank on the western side. The Mughals are busy with the Adil Shahi fighting. He has to meet Qutub Shah, so he has to move through Karnataka. And this is how Chhatrapati Shivaji managed to transport an entire army of 70,000 folks across Karnataka from Mumbai, from Pune to Hyderabad. Once he reaches there, then he attacks the regions of Adil Shah's kingdom, which are to the south of Karnataka, that is in today's Tamil Nadu and all these places. Adil Shah is now impossible for him to leave his conflict against the Mughals and come back south and defend his positions in South India. At the same time, Qutub Shah also sends an army to start attacking the eastern sides of Adil Shah's kingdom. So obviously, Adil Shah cannot in any way oppose Chhatrapati Shivaji. And this is how Chhatrapati Shivaji managed to wage a campaign that is spread all the way, I don't know, about 1200 kilometers from Pune right up to Jinji, Pondicherry. Managed to win quite a lot of places, some by deceit, some by actually fighting. And a lot of these places, Adil Shah is quite at a loss as to how he's going to defend these places against Chhatrapati Shivaji, who has a huge army at his disposal, and Adil Shah is busy fighting wars elsewhere. So the Dakshin Division establishes Chhatrapati Shivaji's authority at a fort called Jinji in Tamil Nadu, which is quite a powerful fort, and at various other places. So he builds a chain of forts right into South India, and we find that this chain becomes very important in the subsequent conflict against the Mughals, which happens after the demise of Chhatrapati Shivaji.
I see. So he goes south. He wins some territory there, and then does he go back north and return to his
Yes. So this
homeland?
whole campaign finishes by the end of 1678. He appoints his own
Hmm.
people at Jinji, at other places, which at Jinji and Vellore, more importantly, and also other
Okay.
few smaller forts in south in the Karnataka. And he finally comes back 1678 back to Raigad. After that, 1679 is more or less the last year of his life.
I see.
1680, early 1680, he passes away. So, Dakshin Digvijay remains his last major campaign.
I see. I see. So he passes away in 1679,
1680, early 1680.
early 1680, right? So then what happens? Who succeeds Shivaji Maharaj?
So, his eldest son, Chhatrapati Sambhaji, succeeds Shivaji Maharaj. And
Okay.
this is at a very, delicate time for the Marathas because once this Dakshin Digvijay completes and Chhatrapati Shivaji comes back to Raigad, this is around the same time that Mughal armies have started again getting into conflict against the Marathas because Aurangzeb now has decided to invade south. There are a couple of reasons for it. One is that he wants to expand the Mughal Empire all the way to Kanyakumari by getting rid of whatever kingdom is in his path. Second reason is that he would like to have ideally done this in the 1673-74 year itself, because that was when Chhatrapati Shivaji crowned himself Chhatrapati and he managed to get rid of the Mughals out of a large number of forts. But for those few years, from about 1674 to 1678, around these 4 or 5 years, Aurangzeb is actually camped at a place near Peshawar, fighting the Afghan tribes. He spent about 3 or 4 years trying to put down the rebellion by the Afghan tribes, which is why he cannot come back to South India. That problem is settled. Now he can send his armies down south, and one of the first conflicts that take place is in early, just about the death, just after the death of Chhatrapati Shivaji. I think in June or July of 1680, the first Mughal armies have started appearing on the borders. And by 1682, Aurangzeb himself had come to Baratpur. So Chhatrapati Sambhaji's reign, from the death of Chhatrapati Shivaji right up to his own uh, martyrdom at the hands of Aurangzeb, is completely about fighting against the Mughals. Along with the Mughals, also
Mhm.
the Portuguese and other powers, mainly the Mughals. And when he comes on the throne and is crowned as Chhatrapati, he's about 25 or 26 years of age. And from that point of time, for the next 8 or 10 years, he's fighting against the Mughals continuously for almost a whole decade. So he does his job of fighting against the Mughals, what he's supposed to do. In fact, if he had been if he had got a peaceful life to rule, I mean, not having a entire Mughal army to face, because the Mughal army that came to Burhanpur and then obviously pitched themselves at Aurangabad, which is why the name of the place is still Aurangabad. It was Khadki earlier, but Aurangzeb established a camp that was supposedly some 25 miles in circumference. Uh, and it contained few lakh soldiers and their dependents and all these things. It was the start of a conflict that would last 27 years, out of which about 8 or 9 were taken up by Chhatrapati Sambhaji.
Mhm.
He was then captured, and what Aurangzeb tried to do was make an example out of him by torturing him to death. And his eyes were put out, his tongue was cut, and then was starved for about 10 15 days, not provided water for a few days. And finally, Chhatrapati Sambhaji's and Kavi Kalash's head was taken around the principal towns and forts of Maharashtra so that people would be demoralized into fighting, demoralized into giving up and not fighting the Mughals. But the opposite effect could be seen in Maharashtra after the demise of Chhatrapati Sambhaji. So, Chhatrapati Sambhaji's reign is about fighting Mughals in the Western Ghats, about at least in my book Battle of Maratha Empire, I put out a list of the battles fought by Chhatrapati Sambhaji or fought during his reign, and I think that list itself goes to about 80 or 90 battles.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot of battles, majorly
Mhm.
fought in Western Maharashtra. To count a few more battles, maybe I think the list easily tops 100. And so all this fighting, what did was that it obviously deflated and you know completely emptied Maratha coffers, whatever money they had. Here again, Chhatrapati Shivaji had made contingency plans in place. He had put money in individual forts so that they could fight on their own when the invasion happened. But even that money was finished. And so when it came to uh, the death of Chhatrapati Sambhaji, now they had to obviously find a successor. And Chhatrapati Sambhaji's own son, 6-year-old son, was taken by the Mughals to their own camp. They were actually kidnapped. And the ruler then became Chhatrapati Rajaram, who was Chhatrapati Sambhaji's younger brother, who was now about 19 to 20 years of age. And this is where Chhatrapati Shivaji's vision became very important, is that they had a fort ready in South India at Jinji. So Chhatrapati Rajaram, instead of trying to fight the Mughals in western Maharashtra, where it was getting increasingly difficult for him to fight, because of 9 years of fighting, obviously they had lost quite a lot. He escaped from there. He traveled all the way to South India to Jinji and managed to establish himself in South India in Tamil Nadu. And then he instructed his own generals such as Santaji and Dhanaji, and of course others also, such as Ramchandra Pant Amati, that they should continue fighting against the Mughals in Western Maharashtra. What this did was that the conflict, which was limited to Western Maharashtra in the Mughal era, in Chhatrapati Sambhaji's era, was now diffused across the entire peninsula. So now the battles were taking place across the entire swath of land from Pune right up to Chennai. A large part of the Mughal army, about 25 to 30,000 soldiers, were laying siege to the fort at Jinji because that is where the Chhatrapati was living. So one part of the army and one part of Aurangzeb's mind was fixed at Jinji, and the other part of the army was fighting all across the peninsula. So this diffused the entire conflict. Another important thing Chhatrapati Rajaram did was that he got rid of this land limits, the policy of not giving price in land. As I mentioned earlier about how the earlier Marathas used to operate, Chhatrapati Shivaji had stopped payment in land. The whole Mansabdari system, which was based on land, so number of soldiers and then land attached for the upkeep of those soldiers. This kind of thing was then done away with by Chhatrapati Shivaji, and he used to provide a proper monthly salary to all his soldiers. His thinking obviously was much ahead of his time, where he said that whatever land is conquered is attached straight to the government. Whatever loot you get is put first in the government treasury, and after this loot is counted, then it will be distributed or it will be given out as salary. And every soldier going to get a monthly salary. All the sardars will get their commanders will also get salary. Plus, Shivaji Maharaj saw to it that the military ranks, as a rule, always got a higher pay package than their equivalent civilian ranks. So, on a fort, if there was a Killedar who was a military rank and there was a clerk who was going to keep accounts for that fort, then the military rank Killedar will definitely get a higher salary as compared to the clerk. And this is the kind of thing that really kept his soldiers together and inspired people, among other obvious examples, to fight for Swaraj. But even all this money had finished by the time Chhatrapati Rajaram had to fight, because this is at the end of 10 years of fighting against the Mughals. So Rajaram had to go back to giving land, and he said that whatever land you want to capture from the Mughals, you can capture and keep, but stay with the Maratha cause. And this is a very important change that he brought about because people have started deserting the Marathas and going towards the Mughals. Now there was a reverse flow because they could now keep the land and they could actually operate like freelancers, in fact. This is how the fight could then continue for the next 17 years, 10 of them under Chhatrapati Rajaram and 7 of them under his wife called Maharani Tarabai, uh, who fought the Mughals from 1700 to 1707. And at the end of it, we find that the Marathas have become a political force in the Deccan, rather than the Mughals, who had more or less wasted 27 years of their life.
So what happened to Chhatrapati Rajaram? Did he die at the end of this
So
10-year
Chhatrapati
conflict?
Rajaram, from 1690 to 1698, he stayed in Jinji in Tamil Nadu. For 8 years, he fought the siege that was put up by Zulfikar Khan. At the end of the 8 years, he finally decided that Maharashtra is safe to return to. He gave up that fort of Jinji, and it was obviously a Pyrrhic victory for Zulfikar Khan because obviously had been fighting for 8 years to get hold of one fort. He comes back to Maharashtra, and 2 years later, he passed away at a place called Sivagat, that same Sivagat, at the age of 30 or 32. Chhatrapati Rajaram was physically not a very strong person. It is generally
I
believed
see.
that he was physically weak or maybe ailing due to something. And hence he passed away. He had one campaign taken against the Mughals in northern Maharashtra, but he passed away in 1700. From 1700 to 1707, his wife ruled as a regent because the surviving Marathas, one was Chhatrapati Shahu, who was in the Mughal camp, but apart from that, the other Maratha princes were very young, one 6 years old or 8 years old and stuff like that. So Maharani Tarabai became the regent queen and she fought the Mughals for the next 7 years. In fact, she was the one who took it to the logical conclusion of seeing Aurangzeb dead at Ahmedabad before finally they could decide that this war had finished.
I see. So Aurangzeb dies in 1807, right?
1707.
1707, right? So then the Marathas are a big, significant power in the Dakshin region of India, the Deccan region of India, and Maharani Tarabai continues until 1707. And then what happens?
So 1707 is about Maharani Tarabai and
Hmm.
Aurangzeb died. Now Aurangzeb died in Ahmedabad and then he was finally buried in Aurangabad. It's a different story. But his entire army very tired of fighting. For about 25, 27 years is have been fighting. Entire generation have been just fighting in the Deccan.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the moment Aurangzeb dies, the entire army decides to turn around and go back to Delhi because now one more fight is coming up, the war to succeed Aurangzeb. And Mughal coffers have depleted a lot in these battles. The Marathas are now a paramount power in South India, a powerful force in South India, but not very good shape themselves because they also have been fighting for past 27 years. So it's a kind of period where a bit of rebuilding is required by the Marathas before they can really assert themselves politically again. And between 1707 to 1713, we have politics where the Mughals release Chhatrapati Shahu, who is the son of Chhatrapati Sambhaji, but he has spent the last 17 years in the Mughal camp.
Hmm.
So now there is a bit of conflict where Maharani Tarabai says that I have been fighting the Mughals for the past 7 years, and Chhatrapati Shahu is agreed that Chhatrapati Shivaji's grandson, but he has been in Mughal Chhauni for the past 23 years. So how do you resolve this conflict? To the modern mind, you might say that in this context, maybe Maharani Tarabai should have prevailed because that is how we will be thinking about it from our modern point of view. That this is a lady who has been fighting the Mughals for 7 years, and this is the person who has just come back from the Mughal camp, who has been there for 23 years. So we give precedence to Maharani Tarabai. But as things worked in the medieval era, bloodline mattered the most.
Hmm.
So Chhatrapati Sambhaji's lineage was going to get prime importance on just the basis of lineage. This is how things worked back then, and which is why Chhatrapati Shahu could get a lot of people to its sides. And finally, it was agreed that Chhatrapati Shahu will succeed and become the next Maratha ruler on this part of the country. Uh, Bahaji Vishwanath played a critical role in this, in getting maximum number of Sardars towards Chhatrapati Shahu and ending this conflict in his favor because this conflict had actually gone on for a very long time and really destroyed Maratha polity by just Maharani Tarabai and Chhatrapati Shahu fighting against each other.
Hmm.
Fortunately, it got resolved in 4 or 5 years, and everybody agreed that for the greater good of the whole country, better that we arrive at a decision. And Chhatrapati Shahu became the Chhatrapati since 1713 around. Balaji Vishwanath was a Peshwa, and 7 years later, obviously, we find that once he has passed away, Chhatrapati Shahu appointed Peshwa Bajirao as the Peshwa in 1720. And this is from this point. Again, in 1719, Balaji Vishwanath signs a very important treaty with the Mughals, which is getting there. Sanat, again, this is debated in the modern day as to how necessary was this. treaty that was signed with the Mughals, and whether the Marathas would have prospered as it is without it, or whether it would have prospered even more without it. So what this treaty was that Balaji Vishwanath went to Delhi to Farrukhsiyar, and he got a sanad saying that the six Subhas of Deccan, that is Hyderabad, you know, Berar, Bijapur, Raigad. So all these six provinces which make up the Deccan, that is south of the Narmada, the entire six provinces belong to the Marathas. They are granted to Chhatrapati Shahu as a Swarajya, and the rights of Sarvdeshmukhi and Chauthai are granted to it. Right to collect tax is granted to the Marathas. Now, once you have granted the right to collect tax, it obviously means you have more or less granted the entire rule to those people. Because once you have granted this right, I can collect money from you, then obviously everything else comes in. Because then I will also have the right to raise soldiers to defend this, because people are going to oppose the tax at some point. If you are going to agree that the right of Diwani, the right of taxation of Bengal was the start of British rule in India, this was a very similar thing that had happened, that the right of taxation had taken. What
But
is
what was the need for taking the permission of the Mughals? Because the Marathas already had
now
control over the southern part of
had
India.
control again? This control was in parts and patches, or some patches were still the Mughal former rulers were still there. Such as Chin Kilij
I
Khan
see.
was there in the Golconda region. What this piece of paper did was that it made Chhatrapati Shahu's work easier.
Okay.
Instead of physically evicting those people from there, he could go with a piece of paper saying that now the rule is for the Marathas, please get out. And that is how a large number of Mughal Kamavisdars and tax collectors were removed from the Deccan and replaced with Maratha counterparts. Uh, there were opposition, such as one from Chin Kilij Khan, who later on becomes the Nizam of Hyderabad, and who right up to 1947 was a problem for India. And even back then,
Yes.
played a lot of politics over this tax collection of the Marathas. Now, uh, one school of thought is that this treaty wasn't really necessary. Where anyways they could have got rid of them militarily, but they Sanat, what it did was that it gave an authority and legitimacy to the Maratha rule in the eyes of all the rulers of India, irrespective of who it was. And such things did matter, in fact, still do matter. So that is one thing. 1720, Peshwa Bajirao comes on the throne, and he says that as it is, we have got control of the Deccan over a
So
period of
may I just
time.
interrupt you? May I just interrupt you briefly? So the last Chhatrapati was Chhatrapati Shahu, right? So after that, what happened? What was the succession like? Because
Chhatrapati,
should there
yeah,
not have been a next Chhatrapati?
yes. So Chhatrapati Shahu was still there.
Mhm.
Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath passed away. So he had to appoint a new prime minister. So
So
there
Peshwa
is
means prime minister.
Peshwa is prime minister, and the
Okay.
Chhatrapati attained a position that is similar to the president. At the time of Chhatrapati Shahu, he was still the ruler, he was still giving a lot of decisions, and Peshwa Bajirao became more like the army commander, where he led all the campaigns. Peshwa Bajirao rarely in Pune, but he didn't have to be. He was the army commander, and all the administrative work was being done very properly by Chhatrapati Shahu. This is a very important role that Shahu Maharaj plays in Maratha politics. Is that he sees to it that there is no palace intrigue or any problems domestically that will require the presence of his prime minister in Pune or Satara. He is free to lead his campaigns in far off regions for months at a time, and with the knowledge that his home will be safe. This is a very important part that Chhatrapati Shahu plays is not really put up, that this whole region of Satara, Sangli, Kolhapur, the core of the Maratha Empire was remained politically safe. And Peshwa Bajirao then obviously has a very glorious career spanning for 20 years, 1720 to 1740, where he decides that as it is, we got this Sanat for South India. Over a period of time, we'll settle this whole region. We should move north. The north is where the Mughals are. The Kafurs are there for us. They are weak, and now is the time to push them and get rid of them. Which is why we have this northward push. Uh, in that Battle of Maratha Empire, I think I covered what five battles of Peshwa Bajirao: Palkhed, Bhopal, one on Vasai, and couple of more. Reaches Delhi, he gets hold of part of Bundelkhand, he gets hold of Malwa, uh, he gets, during his reign itself, their rule over Gujarat solidifies. And from a kingdom that is restricted to south of Narmada, mainly concentrated in Maharashtra and some pockets of South India, during the era of Bajirao, they expand right up to the banks of the Yamuna. So Peshwa Bajirao takes that kingdom and makes it an empire that stretches from the Narmada right up to the Yamuna. It's quite a large swath of land. Uh, he passes away in 1740 and is again succeeded by his son. Now, 8 years into Nana Sahib Peshwa's reign, that is the successor of Peshwa Bajirao, again this Peshwa Nana Sahib, uh, Chhatrapati Shahu passes away. Now, once Chhatrapati Shahu has passed away, there isn't any progeny to take his place. And this is where the importance of the Peshwa goes up because they realize that this is a political crisis where such kind of crisis, the entire kingdoms can be rendered apart because the main ruler has died and there is no successor as such. So there is a person who is believed to be his descendant, but he has actually not been spending time in the royal household. He has been brought up in a non-royal household. Uh, And Maharani Tarabai says that this is actually descendant, but I didn't want to get into a conflict, so uh, he was not brought in a royal household. So this is the point where the Chhatrapati status becomes something similar to that of the President of India, where he is the titular head and the Peshwa, the Prime Minister, still dutifully go and collect their rank and all their paraphernalia from him, and they will, on their seal, say that they are the Prime Minister of this Chhatrapati. But the actual decision making being done by the Peshwas now, because
I
the
see.
Chhatrapati is not in the status. And this is the kind of status that continues more or less for the next 100 odd years, right up to the demise of the Maratha Empire at the hand of the British. So Peshwa Nana Sahib then continues what is Peshwa Bajirao's work. His reign obviously is terminated by the famous battle at Panipat in 1761.
So yeah, okay. 1761 is the first battle of Panipat, right?
That's the third battle of Panipat, if
The
you're counting
third
that
battle
one.
of Panipat. So could you tell me about the battles of Panipat? There were three of these, right? So
Actually, all right.
who were the
So the first one,
participants?
so the first one was between Babur and Ibrahim Lodi. Uh, I believe this
Okay,
happened
okay.
in
Hmm.
1526. That's the first battle of Panipat where
Okay.
Ibrahim Lodi tries to fight against Babur and he loses. Uh, that is the first battle.
Hmm.
Second was between Akbar and Hemchandra, who is referred to as Himu in our books. So Hemchandra
Yes.
Vikramaditya actually got a long string of victories, about 20 or 30 continuous wins he has, and he gets hold of Agra, he gets hold of Delhi, he crowns himself as the ruler of Delhi. In fact, it is the last Hindu coronation at Delhi. Uh, this, I
Yeah.
believe, must be in 1568 or 1569. 1570, they meet at Panipat. Akbar managed to travel there, and a chance arrow managed to find him, Chandra, and after that is everything is downhill for the Indian side. It actually is a combination of Afghan and Rajput rulers. From 1570, there's
Yes.
a long lull of battle at Panipat because the Mughals are defending uh, that place. And then finally, we have the third battle of Panipat at 1761, where Abdali defeats the Marathas.
So that is that the start of the decline of the Maratha Empire?
Yes and no. The Maratha Empire still managed to survive about 40, 45 years after that. They finally get defeated by the British in the Second Anglo-Maratha War in
British.
1803. And till 1803, they are still controlling this entire swath right from Delhi right up to South India. So their territorial loss is not much. They only lose whatever their gains have been in Punjab after Panipat. But the loss is that they are not able to, really resolve the problems that cropped up at Panipat. So the problems that lead to Panipat and the problems that lead to the defeat at Panipat are not addressed in the years that follow. So whether
So
they
what caused
strategize
the
for
defeat in
that.
Panipat? Why did they lose?
So again, there are various reasons why they lost. One is that they were
Mhm.
carrying a large number of camp followers with them. The whole idea was that for Sadashirabha was leading the armies. He led them from south, right from Udgir to north, and the whole numbers swelled up a lot. And there were a lot of camp followers. And the whole idea was that they were going to settle this entire lot in Delhi and around Delhi and Agra. So as to fortify Maratha rule in that place. Uh, on the battlefield itself, first of all, there was wrong planning as to whether they should move north and cut off the access of the Afghans back to Kabul without first ensuring that their own route south is secure. So Panipat happens because the Marathas are literally starved, waiting in North India for the Afghans to break through their lines. But Abdali has his supply line secure; he doesn't have to move north. Uh, as it so happens, the Marathas get starved and now they have to somehow move south, move towards Delhi, and this is where the conflict with the Afghans takes place at Panipat.
Mhm.
Again, the strategizing that they adopt is that he now decides to deploy a infantry artillery combination, an open field battle. By open field battles, Marathas have fought, but they are more accustomed to guerrilla raids and such things. So by going for that team. He has obviously Sadashirao Bhau has tried this out before once against Nizam of Hyderabad at Udgir, where he has fielded a combination of the artillery and the infantry to defeat the adversary. This is the kind of combination that will 30, 40 years later make Napoleon a big name. Uh, exactly the same kind of combination where you know use artillery to such an effect that the opponent's cavalry is of no use. It is a very modern way of thinking, and Sadashirao was quite possibly too much ahead of his time to convince his own supporters, his own commanders, as to what exactly does he want on the battlefield. Uh, because this is a very radical thing to do, that you are going to keep your cavalry to the side and you are going to deploy only your artillery and infantry to get past your soldiers. It requires a lot of discipline from the army. It requires a lot of leadership, and it was a kind of thing that that was still yet just not there in the world. The kind of single point leadership and all these kind of things is still developing, where orders are just followed without thinking about life and death at point of order being said fire to fire, and you get shot in the process or you get shot in the process. So this kind of thinking is still developing at that point of time. So all these factors together combine for a defeat, where the battle strategy and too many camp followers, and they are not in the correct position, so they are in the wrong place because they have to just break through desperately through the Afghan defense. uh, Plus there is a case of the Afghans having reserve forces which the Marathas don't have, and this really finally tilts the balance.
So what were the consequences of the defeat at Panipat for the Maratha Empire?
Right, so what the defeat did was that it was a freight victory for the Afghans, and
Mhm.
Afghani went back without winning anything as such, and he lost a huge number of men on the battlefield. The Marathas were stopped in their northward push, and they had to then spend the next few years recuperating in Maharashtra, where you had the next Peshwa. Again, Nana Peshwa died at the end of all this, mostly surmised due to nervous breakdowns which happened as a result of the Panipat defeat. That just couldn't take it. That his son had died, that his brother had died, all this.
I
So
see.
the next Peshwa was only 16 years old, Peshwa Madhavrao, and this is the time where his adversaries were again coming from all sides. It is to Madhavrao Peshwa's credit that he fought for the next 9 years and he again regained Maratha supremacy in South India as well as North India. In fact, during his reign, we find that the Marathas have once again become supreme in Delhi under Maharji Shinde. 1772, just before the demise of Peshwa Madhavrao, we find that the Marathas have again taken control of the city of Delhi and North India. And plus, he has also defeated the Nizam in 1663 and brought peace in South India. So there is sufficient recuperation post 1761 under Pesha Madhavrao. Then he is succeeded by a person called Savai Madhavrao, who is a very young child, just a baby actually. And this is also a time where his own uncle, Pesha Madhavrao uncle called Raghunath Rao, is also dabbling in politics. He wants to become Pesha, but he is not allowed to become one. And in front of him, he sees a 16-year-old become Peshwa, then he sees another 12-year-old become Peshwa. He kills one Peshwa, that is Narayan Rao. And this is where a person called Nana Fadnavis comes into the picture, where he creates a council called the Barabai. And they decide to make this baby of a few months, of 4 or 5 months, so actually Narayan Rao Peshwa's son. Uh, this baby is now become the titular head, but the rule is actually going on by this council known as the Barabai, and more or less being ruled by Nana Sahib, by Nana Fadnavis. So now what the situation we have is that the Chhatrapati is still there in Satara as the titular head. We have the Peshwa who is 2 months old, and the Peshwa is now received his robes from the Chhatrapati at the age of 2 months. But the rule is being carried out by a council of ministers. And ideally, this system should have reverted back to something else by the time this person came of age, but then he died when he was 21. In 1795, Peshwa Savai Madhavrao dies. And it is from 1795 that things really start going downhill because now the Maratha obviously have expanded into the Holkars and the Sindhes and the Gaikwads, all these various houses across India. And the problems are Panipat. So basically, the problems were about not just battlefield strategy, but also how are you going to deal with such, incidences where suddenly your leadership dies, your Peshwa dies, or important people die. Uh, it shouldn't set back the entire process by so many years. So uh, the Marathas became more and more a personality-centric kingdom, which is why they got defeated by the British, who were a policy-centric kingdom. We go back to Chhatrapati Shivaji, we find that he had given great precedence to rank, to policies, to Swarajji. He always put Hindu Swarajya foremost before any person. And this sentiment had somehow remained throughout. Obviously, even Peshwa Nana Sahib says that we are the students of Chhatrapati Shivaji, but the whole rule had become very personality centric. So once a person died, along with him went all his ideas.
Mhm.
This kind of thing had happened. 1795, once you find that Savai Madhavrao, that Peshwa had died, uh, it really brought everything into focus because now there are no Peshwa. There is nobody to take up that rank. And from 1795 to 1803, 1795 again is the year when the Marathas fight one of the last battles with the Nizam and again defeat him. But we find that after having fielded an army in excess of 1.5 lakh against Nizam in 1795, this kingdom gets defeated by the British 8 years later, 1803. So the whole question is what went wrong that in 10 years we moved from being a principal political force in India in 1795 to being completely wiped off the map by the British in 1803. So this is where their personality, kind of personalities they had came to fore. But they simply didn't see to it that the main problem of the British and we should unite against this because everything was being driven by personalities. As long as Marju Shinde and Nana Fadnis were there, the British didn't trouble the Marathas because they knew what to do and they had the persona and the power to do it. They were succeeded by rulers who did not have that kind of persona. And once that happened, uh, the kind of opposition that should have been there to the British did not take place. 1803, the British found that now is a good time to attack the Marathas. They do not have Marju Shinde with them. They do not have Nana Fadnis with them. They're just not even Aila Hokar, I think, died in 1796. The British realized that this is a personality centric polity which doesn't have any personality to lead them. And a personality centric polity which does not have a strong personality to lead them really collapses very quickly. because there is now nobody to command respect just on basis of their position or rank. This is the kind of thing that did not trouble the British, who are leading very professional armies. So when the British armies attacked, if their commander said something, everybody listened to it because this is how it was going on. And they paid salaries, all the kind of things that Shivaji Maharaj did 200 years earlier were being done by the British armies. Were, you must agree, were a professional force as compared to the Maratha armies at the time. So it was professionalism and proper use of technology that really gave them victory, the British against the Marathas. They had to fight a lot of battles for this. It is not so much of technological advancement because technologically the Marathas were equally strong. Uh, they had the same kind of technology from the French, obviously, they got it from the French. But how to use those technologies, how to manage soldiers on the battlefield, how to conduct warfare such that uh, a small number can defeat a larger number of soldiers or something that the British brought to the battlefield and which resulted in a defeat in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, 1803.
So the Maratha Empire essentially collapses by 1803, right?
Right. So in 1803, what happens is that now the Second Anglo-Maratha War is also a good example of what we call divide and rule. So when we say
Mhm.
that the British conquered by divide and rule, what they did was that the last Peshwa was Peshwa Bajirao II, and this person, when he had a conflict with Yashwantrao Holkar of the Holkar dynasty, instead of um, settling the issue amongst themselves, he decided to go ask the British for help. So the British said, "We're going to help you, but in exchange for this, you must allow one thing: you will never sign any treaty with the Scindias, with the Shindes or the Holkars or any Maratha ruler. We'll decide who you sign treaties with, and you will not keep your own army. We will keep an army, a force outside Pune for your protection." This is what is known as subsidiary alliance. This is the kind of treaty that was signed by the British with the Peshwa. Similar treaty was signed by them with the Gaikwad of Gujarat. Then what happened was that the Bhosles of Nagpur and the Shindes of Gwalior declared war against the British. And they invited Yashwantrao Holkar to join them because now this is the common problem. The British managed to see to it that Yashwantrao Holkar kept out of this conflict by pitching him against Shinde. The way they did this was that they sent actually letters, forged letters to Yashwantrao Holkar saying that this conflict is being you're being taken advantage of by the Bhosles of Nagpur and Gwalior. After this conflict is over, these two are going to crush your power and finish you completely. Better is that you stay out of this contest. So it ended up being a contest between just the Shindes of Gwalior and the British with some support of the Bhosles of Nagpur. Again, this army of the Marathas, the whatever left of it, was divided by the British into two parts. One, General Gerard Lake was sent against North India, and Arthur Wellesley was sent against South India. That is Maharashtra, whatever they had in Maharashtra. So, Daulat Rao Sindh's army was now fighting on two different fronts. And although these battles ended up being some of the toughest fought ones, whether they were at Asai, at Laswari, at Delhi, and various other places. But it ended up finally being a defeat for the Shindes of Gwalior and the Bhosles of Nagpur around the same time. Then we find that once these two defeats have taken place and the Gwalior and Nagpur have been completely crushed by the British, Yashodha Hocker decides that actually it was a big mistake to support the British Empire. And then he starts his campaign against British. Uh, for the next 6 years, he is fighting alone against the British Empire. Finally, after 6 or 7 years of fighting, in which actually manages to win a few battles, he gets defeated and has to finally sign a treaty with the British, which more or less grants him independent rule. But again, it's not the same as what would have really liked. That is getting rid of the British Empire. Finally, after all these things have happened, in 1815, the last Peshwa wakes up and decides to fight against the British. By which time it's really impossible to fight them because now they are ruling over a very large area of India. And after doing all these things in 1803, 1804, it's very difficult for the Marathas to again go back and regain their past glory. So the last Anglo-Maratha War takes place in 1818, but it's more or less of a mopping up operation by the British Empire rather than a war by the Marathas.
I see. Now, when the Marathas were in control of most of India, when there was actual Hinduist Raj, why did they allow the Mughal emperor to stay on in Delhi? Why didn't they just get rid of him?
Right. So there are various reasons. Now there are first of all various examples where the Marathas allow the Mughal to survive in spite of being in a position to remove him. First and foremost, the treaty in 1719, which gets signed by the Mughal. So the Marathas are in a position to absolutely get anything signed by the Mughal, and they actually get the Sanat signed that the six provinces belong to you. Second example you find is that Peshwa Bajirao in 1737 manages to reach the very gates of Delhi, and then he again doesn't replace the Mughal emperor. 1752, we find that there is a Ahmadiyya Karar or Ahmadnama signed between the Mughals and the Marathas, where the Marathas are granted now taxation rights over Punjab, Sindh, and over also Agra and the UP regions. Again, the Mughal survives. Next, we find that in 1761 there is some noise about the Mughal being replaced by the Peshwa once this Panipat fracas ends. Obviously, if Panipat ends differently as the Marathas were expect. Then we find in 1772 the Mughal is brought from Allahabad to Delhi by Maharji Shinde, and again he is being made to sit on the throne. Here we find in 1772 the Marathas are powerful enough to demand 15 lakh rupees from the Mughal when he enters the city of Delhi, 25 lakh rupees once he sits on the throne, and then get a paper signed from him that except the Wazirul Hindustan, which is the Nawab of Awadh, except the Wazirul Hindustan, every other appointment will require the approval of Maharji Shinde. But still, the actual person of the Mughal remains, in spite of having devolved his power to this extent. 1788, we find that again the Marathas, the Mughal gets into conflict with the Afghan called Ghulam Qadir and gets imprisoned by him. But again, the Marathas rescue the Mughal from this point of time in 1788, put him back on the throne, and in 1788 they ensure that the Bhagwa Dhwaj flies on the Red Fort. So from 1788 to 1803, it is actually the Sindh flag, a Sindhya flag, or the Bhagwa Dhwaj of the Marathi or the Hindu Swaraj that is on the Red Fort. It is finally in 1803 that the British come and get rid of the Maratha rule on Delhi. So the obvious question is that after being in so much control, why keep the Mughal alive? Uh, One reason is that when the Marathas reached north, they were looking at an inertia of about 800 years. The Mughals were rulers, but then you find that the administration had not really changed. Administration was in Muslim hands right from the days of Muhammad Ghori. In the time that he had defeated Prithviraj Chauhan, he had got hold of these parts of northern India. And from that point of time, really you find there is no Hindu ruler except for a very brief time under Hemchandra till the time the Marathas appear on the scene. So the entire administrative machinery is uh, in hands of Afghans and Turks and Persians of these kinds. It is not very easy to replace administrative machinery. So if they're going to replace the Mughal emperor, obviously means they're going to have to replace the entire bureaucratic setup also. Because simply changing the Mughal is going to help you. If that new person who's going to sit there is going to take orders from his, Afghans and Turks who are anyways the aristocracy, no point. You have to get rid of the entire aristocracy and then talk about replacing the Mughal. That's one way. In fact, Tukoji Holkar writes a letter in 1771 that this is the kind of thing that was being talked about by Sadashiv Rao Bahu in the lead up to Panipat, that once we get rid of this Abdali, we want to simply wipe out the entire Mughal aristocracy and put the Peshwa on the throne. And this is why people who are otherwise fighting against each other have now ganged up against us. So one reason was to keep all these factions fighting against each other. That we keep the title of Mughal because removing the Mughal had, of course, religious component to it. It had a cultural component also. Our rule of past 200 years has now been finished by these infidels. In fact, this is the exact word that the Mughal emperor, when he is in Allahabad and Maharaji Shinde reaches Delhi, it is this exact word being used in his letter, where he writes that the infidels have got hold of Delhi, and what are the rest of you doing now? Obviously, he's powerless to do anything, but this is the kind of language being used. So this is one aspect that they want to keep these factions fighting against each other till the Marathas are confident enough of getting rid of them together. Let's also not forget that when the British finally managed to get rid of the Mughal emperor, and they had to do it in 1857, it came with a general massacre in UP and Delhi. So we're talking numbers about 1 or 1.5 lakh being killed in Delhi, who are basically retainers of this Mughal king. It's the kind of thing that the Marathas would possibly have to do, and we're not sure whether they would have liked to do that kind of thing. Of carrying out a general massacre of where 1 to 2 lakh people just got randomly killed for it. Again, removing the Mughal meant putting somebody in his place. That meant moving their capital from Pune to Delhi. And this is another aspect where I think practically where they have established their rule firmly in the Deccan, where Pune capital, Pune made into developing city. The entire logistical cost of moving all this from Pune to Delhi just to get rid of the Mughal emperor was it fine? Symbolically means something, but logistically, was it really worth the trouble of moving the entire administrative machinery from one city to other all those years back in the 18th century, just so that they could sit in Delhi? They were doing the whole thing what was possible for them from Pune. I mean, they had got to a position where the Mughal could not sign a document without asking Maharaj's India. So this is the reason why they kept their authority had been eroded to such an extent that he had become a puppet ruler for the Marathas. The Marathas basically choose whatever they wanted to do with the Mughal. In fact, Tipu Sultan, who has been in writing for various reasons, uh, Tipu Sultan basically has written down that this Mughal emperor is a pensioner of the Marathas, and I don't consider him to be a Mughal. So this is the kind of impression he had created. And
Mhm.
practical logic wise, yes, I think the Marathas kept the Mughal on his throne for absolutely practical reasons.
I see. Now, there is one allegation that is made about the Marathas that they carried out all kinds of atrocities in Bengal. So, what is the truth about that?
Right. So when you talk about atrocities of Bengal, I believe you should be talking about the entire Bengal province of that time. So uh, in those days, when you're talking about Nawab of Bengal, it meant today's West Bengal, today's Bangladesh, and also the whole of Orissa and some parts of Bihar. So the Maratha raids on Bengal begin about 1742 and end about 1751. 8 or 9 years of raids. A lot of those numbers are exaggerated. Uh, the primary source for the numbers is one book called Maharashtra Puran. And Maharashtra Puran has been written by a person who was basically the court poet for Alivardi Khan. So there are other sources, other contributors that don't allude to that number. Obviously, maybe atrocities were conducted because we're talking about 9 years of Marathas fighting against Alivardi Khan, not Marathas against Bengalis. Now, what has happened is that because no part of today's Bengal came under Maratha rule proper, uh, as opposed to today's Madhya Pradesh or Gujarat or parts of UP, Maharashtra itself, or Orissa for that matter. So there is no memory of what peaceful Maratha rule looks like in Bengal. So even though warfare and everything happened in Malwa, but then Malwa we also find somebody Ayla Bhai. And even though warfare took place in North India, you find that the Marathas did patronize and tried to get hold of the um, places of pilgrimage. In Bengal, that kind of thing didn't happen. It was a very short period of time, 9 years. And after 9 years, all the fighting ceased between the Marathas and the Bengal, Alivardi Khan. But what is important to see is the condition of Odisha, which was annexed from Bengal province by the Marathas. And Orissa and Jagannath Puri were patronized by the Bhosles of Nagpur. In fact, the kind of patronage that Jagannath Puri got in the 18th century by the Marathas was not matched by any ruler in the past 3 4 centuries since the Muslim rule had started for Jagannath Puri. So we find that there is evidence of them being building pilgrimage centers, not only Jagannath Puri, other temples of Orissa also. Pilgrimage centers were built, large quantities of land were given. I think about 60 bighas of land were attached for its upkeep. Um, places such as Daspatla, other places which were associated with the Jagannath Yatra were made tax free. So there's a place where the wood was taken for building those rath. The Rath for the Yatra Yatra was built by wood from particular few villages. These few villages were made tax free by the Marathas, by the Bhosle of Nagpur. Then there were Anashetras built. There were improvement made in the road from Jagannath Puri into Bengal. In fact, one of the important contributions coming into Puri during Maratha rule was from the Raja of Midnapur. And all this happened at the end of an era which had seen about 17 invasions of Jagannath Puri take place. So 17 or 18 invasions of Jagannath Puri have taken place from the 8th or 9th century. And all these invasions, the last one was in 1732. Uh, these invasions stopped with the coming of Maratha rule. So uh, what happens is that when you talk about Bengal, it's necessary to talk about what happened in Orissa also because Odisha saw stable Maratha rule and Bengal only saw invading Maratha rule. An invading army as opposed to a stable government are two very different things. And this is why I think the whole narrative got colored because we don't normally tend to think today about a large province consisting of Orissa and Bengal and Bihar because these divisions are more recent divisions. But the time period talking about Bengal obviously meant the whole stretch of land right from Orissa into Bihar.
Right, right. So, what is the legacy of the Maratha Empire? I mean, if we look at India today, it doesn't look. I mean, people don't quite remember that there was quite. Yeah. So, if you look at India today, people don't really remember this period of the Maratha Empire when we had actual Hindui Swaraj, when the Turks were defeated and they were made powerless. So, what is the legacy of the Maratha Empire if you look at India today?
The legacy is that they managed to get rid of this entire Mughal rule from North India. We find that a lot of these rulers were evicted, in fact, were replaced by Maratha rulers right up to North India, up to Gwalior, which is quite close to Delhi. And it was not only political, but we will find that through the works of Ahilyabai Holkar and others, it was also cultural rejuvenation. 100 years prior to this, so 1670, I was started at the beginning of the talk. 1670, we are seeing so how Aurangzeb were given orders for demolishing temples, which were once he could demolish. 100 years later, we find that Ahilyabai Holkar is now building temples and financing pilgrimages. The kind of temple building activity that she did is unparalleled. It was only possible because of the political import of the Marathas. Without a political imprint, without getting the government in their hands, it's impossible that Aila Holkar could have then built all those temples and ghats and done so much for Hindu religion. And not only her, but nearly every Maratha ruler has some or the other contribution culturally also. This is a legacy that it has brought the civilizational focus back for India. Uh, it would have been, again, you talk about Pakistan, then with the Mughal rule had continued, there would have been no Pakistan and no India also for that matter. So they got rid of this Mughal rule, and it is the Marathas that the British had to defeat. Maratha Empire, the British had to defeat before they could claim control of India. So they rejuvenated political Hinduism, so that's the correct word to use. And it was only through them that not only them, but even a lot of other places, the Hindu rulers could again come back and become independent rulers. which is why we have done today's India in its current political shape.
Right. So, are you working on any new books now?
Uh, Currently, no, not as such. Because actually, I'm doing my next. No, I'm doing a course for my chief officers and captains. So I'm busy with that currently. Once I'm done with this, I guess I'll start something. But yes, I do have in the pipeline next volume for Battles of Maratha Empire. This will be volume one,
Okay.
and I'll start writing volume two, which will cover a few more battles. So, yeah.
Right. And your the re-release of the book is coming out this year, right? The Lachit
Yes.
Barphukan book.
So Brahmaputra will be released by Bloomsbury. They're expecting a May release, May 2022, and we
Okay.
accept. I would get some noise about the book will start in April. Also.
All right. So, Anish, thank you so much. It was a very
So thanks
interesting,
for
very illuminating talk. So, thank you so much, and all the best for the book release. And let's keep in touch. And
thank you. Thanks
let's
a lot. Yeah.
have another session again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.